Thank you. Good morning. I realize, at least for some of us from the West Coast, this is it's been a bit of an early day. So hopefully we're awake and we'll keep that moving. First one, just to introduce myself. I'm part of Yubico. We've been a part of the FIDO Alliance for a long time, working on the U2F standard, providing a simple, easy to use second factor for authentication. What we have done with Facebook was announced a U2F integration into their platform. And what that was is they added the FIDO U2F authentication protocol so that consumers could use Facebook to securely authenticate for their services. Initially, the use case was people that are using Facebook from a high asset, perspective. Like maybe I'm a journalist, I'm in a sensitive area, I need to sign in securely, I need to not be phished. Maybe I'm somebody that has a brand kind of perspective on Facebook and I need to protect that. We needed something that was stronger, that would minimize the potential for somebody to abuse that account through, and FIDO authentication was the perfect fit for that. We're going to talk a little bit about FIDO authentication and really where we're going to spend a good chunk of time focusing is on what FIDO, when paired with Federation, actually brings you. We had a question earlier about OpenIDC, and you're starting to see the maturation in the pairing of these technologies. But really, when you start adding FIDO authentication to a Federation service, what does that really get you? First off, let's talk lightly about FIDO. You've been hearing these information all morning. But really what we needed was a simple, secure authentication solution that provided users with something that they could use. And when you start talking about platforms like Facebook, it really did start off with college kids, but now it's everyone's grandma and everyone's mother who's signing in. And so unless all of us want to get those, help desk questions from our family and friends, it needed to be easy to use. And that's really the bar when you're addressing a wide-reaching consumer platform. Where does FIDO fit? I want to draw this out because as we start talking about layering authentication into Federation, I want to make sure that we're distinct as to what these things are. We are going to help you strongly authenticate that the user who registered that credential is the user who came back. We are not necessarily going to be able to say that Derek Hanson is that user unless that registration process was tied to identity proofing. We're not going to necessarily say that I am able to use my account everywhere else unless that credential is part of a system that does Federation. When we start talking about Federation and strong authentication, those are really two sides of the same coin. They work best together. Okay. U2F, a little bit, actually it's not too bad of an eye chart. I was a little worried about this. U2F really is a challenge and response flow. Server sends a challenge, the authenticator signs it, and we get rid of a lot of the issues with replay, man in the middle, symmetric challenges, problems that we have in symmetric-based authentication. So I can stumble over that a little bit more. The benefit of it is we know that at the end of the day, there's nobody in the middle, there's nobody being able to replay the authentication request, and that is the credential that we have seen before. We can have a high assurance in that. When we talk about some of the notable reliant parties, Brett mentioned some of them earlier. This group here is a good subsection of who we've done. Because FIDO is an open standard, we oftentimes find out about people who did FIDO U2F because they announced it on Twitter. And so it just, a lot of the adoption just happens. So when we start talking about FIDO U2F and Facebook, keep this list in the back of your mind because one of the concepts we will talk about later will rely on these capabilities. Now, first off, let's talk a little bit about U2F and Federation. Federation is the concept that I have an identity from an identity provider that I can take elsewhere. I'm going to assume a fairly high bar of people understanding Federation here, just because it's the Cloud Identity Summit. But in general, I want to make sure that you're clear that it's I sign in somewhere that I'm establishing trust with somewhere else. A lot like the Department of Licensing gives you a license that somebody else is able to verify and trust. The second part of that is FIDO U2F, along with the other FIDO technologies, provide strong security during that authentication so that when somebody else is relying on that federation, they have a high assurance that you did the authentication correctly. What this adds, as I said, is the second side of that coin for protocols like SAML, OAuth2, OpenIDC, where we get that simple, strong authentication that we can then federate out. Let's talk a little bit about what Facebook did. When Facebook added FIDO U2F, they added the ability for people to use security keys. We call it the Yubico, but the industry has called it a security key because what it is it's a simple device that I can bring to a workstation, a simple authenticator I can bring to a workstation or a device to allow me to authenticate. It's external, it's portable, and it allows me to simply insert the device or tap the device and sign on. The benefit for Facebook is they do a lot of social login scenarios. You can log into, I think it was a Pizza Hut where I saw log in with Facebook to order your next pizza. It's starting, the adoption rates of social logins are growing because of efforts in the OpenIDC side and other people in this community. What Facebook gets out of this, again, looking back at the benefits, is a phishing protection. So if I am using Federation and I'm saying, you know what, I'm going to rely on my Facebook login, all my customers have Facebook, so we're going to use Facebook to sign in. I don't have to worry about their credentials getting phished. I get a very simple logon flow because the external party provides and manages the entire user management. And I get something that's very interoperable. So maybe I want Facebook today. Google adds it tomorrow, and I want to add Google in. Maybe somebody else adds it tomorrow. The idea is I got a similar token that I can use in many different places, and I can start to tie federation together with my account so that I can do things like account recovery, which we'll talk about here in just a second. In the context of the Facebook side, this was a lot in the OpenID Connect type flow. But this is very similar in an enterprise side if you're dealing with traditional SAML type interfaces where you've added MFA to an identity provider. What you start to get by adding by adding strong authentication to federation is something that you have a high assurance in. So let's take a quick look at a scenario using the Facebook service. So in the case of using like the New York Times, I can go to log in, and I'm prompted, and I've got my login with Facebook, my login with Google. Both of these options do not require me to manage a password with New York Times. I can now rely on my strong authentication from a consumer perspective to get rid of another password I have to manage. From a consumer side, this is a story that we're starting to tell more and more often, which is get rid of the number of passwords you have by using federation. That's the biggest gift you can give people when they start talking about what are we doing and how can we use this to affect my life, is secure your email account, secure whatever that account is that you want to trust, and then use that everywhere you can and start to get rid of those passwords. Now, you click the login with Facebook button and you'll get a screen that looks an awful lot like this. You get to a screen that asks you to sign in with your Facebook account, and then you'll get a challenge right after that to tap your Yubico key, or tap your security key, sorry. And you will actually sign in securely to the system, and you will end up on their front page. And then you start going and looking. Let's say you are starting to look at how did Facebook set me up? Where is those screens? Most of the people that have implemented the authentication with FIDO U2F have something that says security keys in the account profile. So you can register multiple keys. You can name them. You can get information about when they were last used, which is really helpful because we had the question earlier today about what do you do in an account recovery scenario? What happens if I lose a key? The idea of FIDO is that it'll be everywhere. You will have lots of devices that you could potentially register credentials in so that we can minimize the bar for account recovery. Because right now what's happening is you lock your password out, you're in an account recovery flow. I got to call a help desk. I have to prove who I am by telling you who I went to prom with or what street I grew up in, what my dog's name was. And then if you're like me, you end up putting a random thing in there so somebody else can't do it. Then you got to go look that up, and hopefully that was recorded correctly. So the challenge here is we need to give people something that they present. As you get rid of passwords, that means you have to have a device that can do this. The average person can't do a signature algorithm in their head, so you're going to need to give them something. And as those things become more and more ubiquitous, as these have more and more services that turn on, you have more authenticators that you can bring to the table. So things like, what is the name of the authenticator starts to really matter. Maybe it says it's on my wife's key ring and it's the blue one. Maybe it's the one that's the backup key on the safe. And it was last used, only when I registered it. But it is helpful to know about what's going on there. So I've started to talk a little bit about the benefits of FIDO and Federation. When you get into social authentication and you start having FIDO start to mature as far as within the OpenIDC world, and we have these extended authentication profiles, now we can start creating a system where I trust you, not just for authentication, but for account recovery. I mean, maybe I have multiple identity providers that all have FIDO enabled. I've lost my key that I had registered with Facebook. Maybe I can use somebody else's service to recover. It gives us some tools to start looking at account recovery options differently while potentially maintaining similar levels of assurance. The trust frameworks for Federation can be used to leverage in account recovery. And I think this is a very interesting place that we're going to go into, both from a consumer-facing as well as vendors, partners, and business. There's a lot of scenarios here where having multiple trusted identity providers creates tools to get rid of the business processes or the personal processes for managing credentials. Credential management is one of the hardest parts about what Jeremy was just talking about from an operation side. If I'm deploying smart cards, the credential, how you got it, where you're using it at, there's a lot of challenge there. Well, we're creating a new paradigm by going to FIDO, and we've made credential management easy, but we have to address account recovery, device registration. This is where those techniques start to come in. Additionally, you allow users to opt out of managing a password. The more places that enable Federation and they choose services that have FIDO, you get strong authentication and it's somebody else's problem. That is a great way to win on rolling an app out. It's simple and secure for your users. And I do want to make this clear. We're talking about Facebook. This is a pattern that is viable for employees, customers, vendors, and partners. And you better believe that the authentication services done that we're showing you today are not the only ones that people are using in these companies. So out of this, what I'd like to just kind of leave you guys with the challenge is we can start doing this now. I said oftentimes that we are hearing about these things over Twitter, over messages that we get in email. The U2F specifications are out there. There's tools that are open source to go build your own servers and implementations. Google, Facebook, all of these guys have services up and running. I know other people that will be launching them soon that we can start to all develop applications against and start to trust these federated identities. We've got a couple of test suites. So I did want to try and leave a little bit of time for questions in case there were. Otherwise, I just went too fast. So any questions?
Microphone here too.
One of the things that was mentioned in the opening presentation was that there's no global unique identifier for FIDO. But if you start relying on Facebook to be a federated source of identity for users, aren't you basically allowing it to recreate a global unique identifier for users as they move around the web?
So we'll talk about this from two angles. FIDO does not have a unique identifier that can trace you among different systems. So we're not going to create a thing where your bank or your insurance company is going to know what medical facilities were using, or we're not going to create a situation where you're linked. However, if you use a FIDO authenticator with Federation, you have opted to bind that authenticator to your identity. Your identity is what's tracking you across these different sites because you have chosen to federate. There's a difference between what you're allowing a user to choose to do versus something that they have no idea that's going on behind the scenes. And so FIDO preserves that tracking, so if I'm not federating, you don't know that it is the same person going from site to site to site. But if I am federating for the benefits, you definitely know that that is that user. And that's the whole benefit of federation. So when you couple them together, you do get that scenario where you're tracked by ID. Anyone else? Oh.
Hi, Derek. Thank you. My question is about account recovery. You mentioned it on a previous slide. Could you walk through an example of account recovery based on social?
Sure. So let's say I've got FIDO authentication added to my system, and the user has lost they only registered one device to sign in with, and they've lost that device. So now I go into an account recovery flow. So instead of clicking forgot my password, it's I've lost my authenticator. One of the options that could come up in that could be log in with Facebook, log in with Google. And if they're able to successfully log in using that FIDO authenticator, then you can trigger a new credential registration process for them to self-serve back into that system. Because you've set the bar as part of that authentication being, you need to sign in with FIDO for this to occur. So now I can use that FIDO assurance level to then come back and register a new FIDO credential. Anyone else? Front. Yeah, we got a couple hands.
Couple of questions. First, how the identity attributes are going to be maintained, and the second one, how are you going to chain back? If I am logging with Facebook, how do you really associate me to self-serve? Because there could be some of other attributes which are very important for me to continue with the system.
Correct. So within the scope of how this is done, it's going to be very specific both to the type of business that you're in. You know, if you're in a financial tech position, you're going to have a different view of it than if you are in a consumer platform streaming music. In that case, maybe the email address is the only identifier that you need to match that shows that I've matched. So social account recovery may not be the right solution for every scenario, but it is something that is starting to occur. So in a case where you are in a higher assurance level where you need additional attributes, it's about establishing a trust relationship with somebody else who has those attributes that can provide that assurance back to you. This is about trust in the scope of federation and how you've authenticated. So maybe Facebook isn't the right IDP for you, but maybe there is one that is right for you.
Time for one last question.
Can you repeat what is FIDO is and is not again?
Sure, let me jump back to that slide real quick. FIDO is simply authentication. FIDO does not have identity attributes to it. It is purely a credential that is bound to an account. So when I send a challenge and that is signed successfully, I know that the authenticator that was used at registration is the one that is used during authentication. It is up to the application or the identity owner to make sure that that credential is bound to an account so that it's useful.